Hello and welcome to another edition of TCI Behind the Scenes. I'm your host, Yasmin Rigby Blues. The topic for this particular show is labor, and we're going to have two segments. First, we're going to talk with the Labor Department and then with the Tribunal. We're starting it off with Mr. Alpheus Smith, Labor Inspector. Yes. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm all right. And yourself?
I'm good. To start with all that, because I'm about to ask some really pointed questions. First, let's talk about the problem that we're faced with some persons being paid less than minimum wage.
Okay. We receive a few complaints pertaining to people being paid under the minimum wage. What we are doing currently at the Department of Labor is that we are following up on those reports, and as we confirm that this practice is being done in any organization, what we do is we rectify it immediately, and having the employers to pay the sum that should have been paid to the employee.
Minimum wage is?
The minimum wage is currently at $5 per hour.
And how long has it been going on that persons have been complaining over not receiving that amount?
Well, I'm aware of it since a year and plus ago.
And how do you deal with it? If you've gone to an establishment and you found out that they are in fact paying less than minimum wage?
What we do is we would send an inspector in who has the authority to inspect the person's records. Mm-hmm. And what happens is that how we arrive at these reports is that we find persons coming in who have a concern about their wages. Mm-hmm. And once they stress that concern, what we do is that we arrange to send an inspector in, and once we find out that the people are not in compliance with the regulations as it relates to the minimum wage, what the inspector will do right there is they have the authority to inform the employer of their not compliance with the regulations, and instruct them to meet the requirements. And if there was any payment, most likely it would be, because if they were not paying the people in accordance with the regulations, there are some back pay, and we will ensure that these people are paid according to the minimum wage regulations.
Now we've established the fact that we are having this problem, and do you find it mainly with our foreign workers or across the board?
We found it mostly with the foreign workers, with the import laborers. We don't find it much in the Belonga population. Reason being is that $5 is the minimum wage, whereby that is we look at that as a wage from the beginners, apparently from say a laborer. Mm-hmm. or a helper or domestic worker or something like that. But then when we're talking about skilled workers like carpenters and electrical people and plumbers and all of that, we do not expect for the employers to even mention $5. Okay. To those folks. There is a domestic set rate for it's not by law, but then there's a rate that these people usually be paid, and they themselves will make that agreement during the interview and the drafting of the contract.
And as you say, with imported labor, do you think the persons being imported were imported with a promise of less than minimum wage?
That could be the case, but I wouldn't be able to say that. Mm-hmm. because we would not be there when these contracts are, well, the agreement that they make in their country does not have anything to do with us here, because what happens is that you may find certain things that might be legal in another country that is not legal here. Once whatever agreement that they make, take for instance in China, once that person is going to work in Turks and Caicos, what happens is that they must comply with our regulations. Whatever agreement they make in China, as long as it's not consistent with our regulations here, it is not valid.
So they made an agreement, $3 in China. Yeah. Come here, they have to be paid.
They have to be paid $5
at minimum. And with the skilled laborers coming here and being paid that, say, minimum wage, $5, how does that reflect on the rest of the economy where other skilled laborers here have to now compete?
We have a lot of people coming in with that concern, and it is our department responsibility. Right now, what we are doing is that we are dealing with quite a few companies right now with the same issue, and we promise that within the not too distant future that we will have quite a bit of it ironed out. We are working on this on several companies right now currently, and we would try our best to inform them of the regulations and the requirements of the employers and I mean to the employees. What happened is that the commissioner, the Labor Department, we have the authority. Once these applications are placed in our office for consideration, we have the authority to peruse this application and view all of these concerns. Now, and it is in our powers, if we feel that that the wages that are placed on in these contracts, if it's not compatible with what we expect here, we can also use. We don't have to grant the application.
Okay.
We don't have to grant the application. So these are measures. These are things that we are now looking out for and now beginning to use, so that our local population will not be
horribly affected
by that.
There's also a problem where a number of persons have been brought in on contracts, granted work permits, then fired. Once they're fired, what is the process that's supposed to take place?
Under the immigration regulations, what happens is that it is the authority of the responsibility of the employer from the time the contract is ceased. Once they terminate the person's services or the contract comes to an end, it is the responsibility of the employer to notify the Director of Immigration of the cessation of the person's employment with that company. And failure to comply with that regulations, it's an offense. Okay. So now the immigration authorities now have the power under the law to go in and enforce the law. And also on the other hand, on the employee side of it, the employee also have a responsibility under the law, under the regulations, also to inform the director of him not working with the company and submit the work permit for cancellation. Okay. And failure to comply with that, the employee also is liable for prosecution.
Wow. And we've had cases where persons have been terminated, they still have their work permits, and they're left here to seek other jobs because, of course, no one made necessary provisions for them to go back wherever it is that they came from, and another work permit is sought for another person coming into the country. How is Labor Board dealing with that?
That should not be the case, but what happened is that the immigration regulations, again, we go back to that. What happens is that, and even on the back of the work permit card, it is also stipulated that the employee does not have that right to change employer. And the regulations also, I think it's regulation, I think it's section 10A of the immigration regulations, which also where the immigration board have that authority to impose such restrictions on the work permit card. Now, once that person employment cease with the current employer, what happens is that person is supposed to leave. So what we are doing now at the Labor Department is we are now ensuring that these regulations are enforced.
And how long, how many persons are you dealing with at the moment? Because we have quite a large foreign employee base.
There are quite a few numbers that might be in this category. There are quite a few people that might find themselves in this category. But what happened is that the Labor Department is beginning to work closely with the Immigration Department to ensure that this practice discontinue. Because what happened is that we are counting on the Immigration Department to do their surveillance. And the Immigration Board also, we will have to include them in this circle also, because they're the ones who keep the files for the work permits. And once the work permit comes in and the work permit is denied by the board, we also expect for the secretary of the board to inform the Immigration Department so they can go out and do the necessaries.
Oh, very interesting. I've noticed that someone actually gave me a call recently, and they said there were some immigrant workers all over Turks and Caicos, particularly in Provo, complaining they hadn't been paid, and they were knocking on persons' doors asking for money or something to eat. Have you been appraised of it?
No, we're not aware of that. Well, I'm not aware of it. What happens is that if something like that should happen, there are procedures in place to deal with them, because the law states, the employment regulation states that no one should work without being paid. And once you can prove that you have worked for a particular employer, the employer must pay you. So if by any chance anyone were to find themselves in such a predicament, they have a right to come to the Labor Department, and we will ensure that the matter is dealt with. They must be paid in accordance with the regulations.
When bringing in foreign laborers, there's always the deposit fee that's paid, which I think is supposed to for repatriation.
Yes.
Is that really being used when a person fires a foreign laborer and doesn't notify the immigration board? What then happens? Because the person is basically just left.
The deposit, it more or less like a security bond, whereby in the event government have to repatriate the person, that money will help to defray the cost of the repatriation. But the thing it is still the responsibility of the employer, the person that imports the person. It is their responsibility to ensure that the person is housed, to ensure that the person is living, the accommodation is suitable, because the regulation also says that the accommodation must be suitable, that the person is paid, and every other cost that this person encounter while as it relates to their coming to the Turks and Caicos Island to work, their work permit fees, all of these fees are to be paid by the employer. And in the event the person have to leave, it is the employer responsibility to see that person back to their country of origin.
And what about in the case of nationals who are from distant countries, and they're not being able to get back home because, of course, insufficient funds.
Well, there should never be a case where an employer brings in someone to work and then refuse to see them back to the country of origin. In the event something like that happens, there are laws in place to deal with it. There are several matters right now that are currently before the tribunal for their dealings. That will be finalized shortly.
Okay. And does the government ever get involved and say, pay itself for the repatriation of employees? And I know when it comes down to Haitians, it seemed to have been an easier thing. But when you're talking about people, say, from the Philippines, from China, you're talking about a lot more having to pay.
Yes. Well, like I said, that it is the government's responsibility to ensure that the employers comply with the regulations. So in cases like that, the relevant authorities will instruct the employers, and if the employers refuse, take for instance, the matter is first dealt with by the Labor Department to see if the Labor Department can solve the problem before reaching to the tribunal. Now, in the event the Labor Department give an instruction, a direction to the company, the employer, and they refuse to carry it out, the Labor Department then have an option to refer the matter to the tribunal, who will then take the matter and deal with it according to the regulations that governs the tribunal.
Okay. Going to find out a lot more about this when we come back. Al Services, agents of G&G Shipping, offers weekly sailing arriving to Provo on Mondays and Thursdays. We ship all size parcels, pallets, container loads, and heavy equipment, and our custom brokerage department is always